World of Warcraft versus Final Fantasy XIV. Which game is worth your time and which one should you avoid? Nimicry is going to battle for the Horde and the Alliance. I'm going to battle for the Grand Companies of Eorzea. And Mike is going to be stuck in the middle and decide which one is worth his time. Let's start with the gameplay and the experience of each game individually. And Nimicry, I'm going to let you go first because I am a gentleman and let you make your argument for why World of Warcraft has the best combat out of these two games. Also, no spoilers.
Okay, I will keep the spoilers for... luckily, I shouldn't have to spoil much for the combat. I will say that for combat and I guess as an extrapolation class mechanics, WoW has the best system because their system is based and tested at more levels than Final Fantasy XIV. So, for example, while Final Fantasy XIV has their raids, they have their normal, extreme, savage, and I believe there's something in between there. They also have their dungeons. WoW has several different levels of dungeon in addition to an infinitely scalable dungeon. So that means that when you want to really tweak something out, when you want to be like, I know this class inside and out. I know this class to where I can do things that other players can only dream of. You go into WoW. Also, the fact is WoW has a shorter global cooldown of 1.5 seconds versus Final Fantasy's 2.5 seconds base. I think is better because I like a faster gameplay. Now, not everybody's going to agree with that, and that's okay. That's personal preference. In addition, the fact that the classes all work together, provide a simple set of buffs, and the gameplay is more streamlined towards doing damage as opposed to having to micromanage certain buffs that you see in older game styles makes it better. We see this most recently with Shadowlands and the removal of Inquisition. I think we'll leave it there for now.
Well, we're going to be getting into it in a lot more detail. Can you... I want to make a criticism against your points there that WoW doesn't know when to leave well enough alone. In my opinion, the biggest problem with WoW's gameplay is why the fundamentals are still the same. You press the button, you use the global cooldown, blah, blah, blah. They keep changing everything so freaking all often that it becomes far less accessible to those who are playing it to actually enjoy the experience. I used to be a... What was it? What were the three professions of the hunters? The marksman, the beastmaster, and
survival.
Survival used to be my main class until they decided we're going to turn this into a melee class.
Okay, so right around Warlords of Draenor, that's fine.
Perfect example, and it just... I got sick of the game changing all the time on me.
Okay, so now I will say that being a game that's been out for a while and having a very large player base and having needing balancing patches, of course, are always going to happen and go through. They have a less, let's say, deterministic content cycle than Final Fantasy XIV. I believe Final Fantasy XIV is almost releasing quarterly, if I remember correctly, with 5.4 being the most recent patch. The thing that I'm going to say about that is you're talking about borrowed power systems. Now, borrowed power systems work fairly well. Now, I want to make sure that you want to make sure you hear me right when I say that. I say fairly well. They're not perfect by any means, because I don't want somebody to say things that's not true. Borrowed power systems we saw being very well in Legion at 7.3.5 was the best iteration of any borrowed power system because you had your legendaries, you had the ability to acquire which specific legendaries you wanted, and you had a path to get it to where you could deterministically plot it out. Hey, if I do X content for Y number of weeks, or hypothetically, I will get Prime 1 and Prime 2 legendaries, and I'm good. That's what I need for my class. Now, I will say that because I don't know if you played during this time, and I want to be perfectly transparent, Legion did not launch with that system. Legion launched with our legendaries being randomly assigned, and me personally, I received a helmet that reduced the cooldown on my stun, while another paladin received a cloak that increased his DPS output by about 25%.
That sounds
So
like
that
a
was,
balancing nightmare.
it can be. And for again purpose of
Yeah.
being honest, there are 200 legendaries in Shadowlands, so we'll enjoy that. I'm sure you'll see me raging about that at some
Masty
point.
already pointed out that she tried to return to her mage that was maxed out when she left WoW. That was probably Wrath of the Lich King period. And then because they had split the classes, and I think this is actually the biggest mistake they ever made, it was deliberately splitting the classes into 3 separate groups. You
So
had
Wrath
to
of the Lich King-
either be an ice mage, a fire mage, or an arcane mage. There was no capacity for freedom there. There's no capacity for experimentation, or like you could maybe use like an ice trap even though you're a fire mage. But then like I don't know the specifics of
So,
how they're arranged
allow
right
me.
now, but it felt like you were just being you have to do this or this. There wasn't any
That system that she's complaining that Macy's complaining about actually started in Mists of Pandaria.
yeah. Oh
with
no,
the
it's been
talent-
around for a while, but
with-
I
with
much
the
preferred
talent
when you could
trees.
just choose your talents.
Yes, yeah, when there was the talent tree and you could pick one, you got a point every level or so. And you could start at level 10. Now at Miss Pandaria, they changed it to you got these tiers of talents and you only had to choose one of 3, and each time you chose a spec, it would demonstrate which talents you could choose. And that was designed to increase balance, because you have to understand, especially with mage during that time, if you were a good fire mage and you used combustion right, there were procs and swings of 40 and 50%. So people who underutilized combustion specifically, and I use that one because it's the most egregious example, some people would be doing 10k DPS, some people would be doing 100k DPS, but it's the same mage with the same gear and the same spells. So that was why they decided to go with the balancing rod. That,
But it makes it far less interesting, in my opinion. Not everything needs to be like. Yes, people are still always going to pick the min max path, regardless of what system you use. They're going to do the maths and figure out what works best. But in Final Fantasy XIV, you level up your character, you get your skills, and that's it.
I would disagree from the higher end content perspective. I played a monk in 5.0 and a machinist in 5.1, and the monk opening rotation, to do it correctly, was 27 steps.
Oh,
so
yeah. Don't get me wrong. Those steps are complicated, especially if you're a freaking monk. The only thing that's worse than monk is probably ninja, because you have to do all your jutsu shit just to. You're basically playing. It's Naruto the video game. If you play as a ninja, where you literally have to do your jutsus in the right order to get the optimal skill at the right time, and the
Yes.
summoner rotation takes 3 minutes.
Yeah, no, I'm that's why I'm saying, like, and my rotation, for example, let's say my Retribution Paladin, is not even a rotation so much as it is a priority system, because it's based on, everything is based around the resetting of procs. So for example, I build up my holy power, I have 3, is execution sentence up? It is? All right, use execution sentence. Do I have Wake of Ashes? Oh, I do? Okay, use Wake of Ashes. I build up more holy power. I then put spenders inside a window, hammer hits, detonates, and we're done. So I'm not speaking bad about the monk, Mara. I love the monk. I'm just saying I was not good enough to parse higher than 50%. I'm just going to be honest. We did Extreme Titania, and I could not get higher than 50% parse on Final Fantasy logs. And I tried. I punched my way until my feelings were hurt. And they were hurt. They were hurt a lot.
Masty, I agree with you that early on in the game, there is not much variation in the abilities. This is a criticism I can make against this game. Most of your coolest skills only come in the later part of Final Fantasy XIV. But around level 50, 55, that's when you start to open up the really the really unique skills. The stuff where you can decide, should I do this here? Should I do this there? Do I want to like my healer in the last 6 levels has gotten a ground AoE heal, a full buff immediate heal, a stronger regen. It just varies up what I can do so much more, and I feel like WoW stripped away its complexity.
So
Well, it's still like you're complaining that Final Fantasy XIV is too complex. And,
no,
and
I'm not. I'm complaining that I don't think it's complex in the right areas. So, for example, you are a healer. We're going through a dungeon. In WoW, a good white mage equivalent would be, I'm getting ready. I'm paladin, getting ready to go tank a boss. You throw regen on me, right? You throw regen on me, and if I don't hit the boss first, even if I get one hit on the boss, you still have aggro over me smashing that boss in the face of me having a regen on, which I think is not great. I don't think that's
are you
balanced.
saying that you think Final Fantasy XIV, like from the fights perspective, is too easy?
No, I'm not saying. I'm saying that I think the threat needs to be balanced in PvE content, because really, you throw healing spell on me, great. Healing spell on me does not hurt enemy. You can heal me all day long, and if I just stand there, nothing happens. As a paladin, if I do my, like my royal authority combo, promenade and all that, like, hey, let's do this, that actually hurts the enemy. But if you put a regen on me before combat, you have like way more threat than I think you should as a healer.
In Final Fantasy XIV.
Yeah, in Final Fantasy XIV.
But that's a good thing, because
no, not necessarily. It doesn't make sense.
There was a time back long ago in a land far, far away where you actually had to think about threat in World of Warcraft, where you actually had to think, was my character generating more threat?
Yeah.
Whereas in Final Fantasy XIV, you actually still have to think about it. You're like, I'm healing too much. Maybe I should cool off for a second and let the tank do his job. The fact that you actually have to think about that, to me, that's a good thing. Instead of the tank just being like, whack, it's my attention now. Just go for me.
So WoW moved away from that style of gameplay to the style of maximizing DPS and maximizing classes. So instead of having to, because I remember that time where, hey, you're doing too much threat. Okay, looks like it's time for me to sit still for 5 seconds and regain my mana, which doesn't sound fun because it isn't. So they were like, all right, we're gonna give tanks more threat. Now, guys, you can fully unleash and unload all the potential of your classes. Go nuts. And now, when I pull threat off as a Retribution Paladin, because I do on occasion, that means I was rocking and rolling.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, Retribution Paladins are kick-ass, but
they can be.
I just feel like big numbers go up, yay. I would rather the numbers were smaller and I had to think about my group more.
They did that in Shadowlands.
Yeah. We'll see how that goes, because that's been delayed. So let's hope they fix that. Mike, what's your verdict? If you had to pick one game based purely on its combat, which one would you go for?
You see, for me, I am going to have to go with Final Fantasy for the combat, and this is purely based on me as a person. I find WoW a lot harder, but I do feel like, given some time to learn it, I would prefer WoWs a lot more. But this is just coming from a current standpoint.
Nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, Final Fantasy XIV does have some really good combat. There are some really good fights. My favorite fight in Final Fantasy XIV is the Hunter's Medal, the Hunter of Bardom, the one that's the puzzle fight, where you have to go in and you have to do the thing. I found that was really fun, and I also really enjoyed Midgardsormr. I loved Midgardsormr because that was, and I'm not going to say why because no spoilers, but
good fight.
That was a really, really good fight. So I think, and then there was one in Karn, the one with the little eyelids that pop out that fire beams at you, and you had to kill the Judgment of the Sun.
I hate that dungeon, just FYI.
I love that dungeon, except when I'm tanking it, because people will be like, because I'll do my AOE threat generator on bats, and then people will be like, Tank, why didn't you pick up threat? I'm like, other players.
Every time I go into Karn, we die. Like, without question. It's the goddamn bees, not the freaking bees.
Oh, Final Sting! It's final state.
Yeah,
You
like
need people
yeah,
to be
you
like,
know what? I'm just going to take off 90% of your health and then hit you with another attack just immediately kills you. It's like, I think they just want me to use raise. It's like, you know, guys, you just got this raise ability. Maybe here's an excuse to actually use it.
well, then tell your DPS to be like, you can interrupt everything in this game. You can stun everything in this game. Use it.
Most people at level 45 don't know what an interrupt is. Let's be honest.
Okay, like, well, by the time you're in WoW, you've had your interrupt for 15, 16 levels at that point. Unless, of course, you happen to be me, which is a melee healer. Literally, as a holy paladin, I'm in melee, and as a prot and a ret, I have an interrupt, but I somehow lose the ability to nimpact as a holy paladin, despite having the same mailed fist, despite having the same arm. I just lose the ability to interrupt. So whatever.
So Mike, who does it go to? You have to
I
pick
think I'm
one.
going to stick with Final Fantasy.
Okay.
All right.
I'm actually going to concede a point here. I enjoy the visual arrangement of Final Fantasy XIV's fights, but I do agree that when it comes to endgame content, WoW has that down to a T. There's far more complexity there.
WoW does have a richer offering at the end. And also, I just want to add on as well that while I am downloading Final Fantasy XIV after this, I am also downloading World of Warcraft after this. So if either of you want to take me on a journey after,
tell your wife that I'm sorry.
Yes, I also apologize for words. I'll apologize for words as well. I'm not conceding a damn point. No.
Okay.
You see, I feel like it'd be a bit of a cop-out if I just said, I think they're both good in their own right. I think that's a bit too much of a...
You have to pick one, unfortunately.
Yeah,
we're not taking the middle path here. If I lose...
There's a reason there's a guilty and not guilty verdict, and not a maybe kind of sort of guilty, but not
done
really.
It, but we don't know.
Yeah.
But he's really nice. He did all that charity work for the kids. Let him go.
That makes it okay for him to
sus.
kill a village. Okay, so next we're going to move on to the setting, the world, the lore, everything that encompasses the world that you're inhabiting in this MMO. And I think this is going to be an easy victory for me because Final Fantasy XIV actually has a story.
All right.
WoW is making everything up as it goes along. This content exists purely for the sake of creating new content. As far back as freaking Burning Crusade, the creators were like, oh, we forgot that the Draenei were the bad guys. And just the whole creation of how this, they had to convolute everything to make Draenei's alliance and Blood Elves horde, and it was just a complete utter clusterfuck. And then you go into freaking I'm not even going to start on Shadowlands. This is just, now they're literally just making stuff up. Now we've got a magical realm that all dead people go to that's never really been a thing that we've actually discussed in the past. And oh, by the way, we're traveling back in time to an alternate reality where we fight the orcs, but it doesn't really actually impact anything, but it will if you don't win the fights, but it doesn't really. So why are we even doing this? We're going to we're going to Draenor in Burning Crusade, and we're going to Draenor in Warlords of Draenor, and this, the entire world, the entire lore, everything is a complete and utter clusterfuck. It's
all right.
It's madness.
All right, so let's do you want to actually make a point for your side, as in the story of Final Fantasy XIV?
Oh, sure. Absolutely, I can do that.
First, if you'd like me to.
Final Fantasy XIV, while the beginning chapters are a little slow-paced and do not develop the characters as effectively as they could, once you get to the end portion of A Realm Reborn and move into Heavensward and everything afterwards, the entire game becomes entirely focused on these characters, this world, the things that happen to you. You feel like you exist in this world as an important element. People talk to you. they interact with you. The dungeons are directly connected to the story. You progress through that story in a very admittedly linear fashion, and that is a criticism against the game. You can't do new content unless you finish the story. But I'm invested in these people. I care about what these people are doing. While there are individuals that I do have an interest in WoW, like World of Warcraft, I am not going to care. Like, ultimately, I'm not going to feel anything if one of these leaders dies or something happens to them or anything like that, because it's just wild, over-the-top comic fun. Whereas one small individual can die, won't name any names, and you are heartbroken because the game has set up this connection with this person for the last 40 hours, just like the best Final Fantasy, so that you actually care about them. And so far, the story has not let me down, and the world feels like it exists for a purpose instead of just existing for the sake of a new expansion.
All right, so let's go over some things. First, I want to make sure we set a delineation from lore in game versus lore in books, because both are subject to retcons, as you know, in a long thing. Second, now let's talk about things. We know that the Outland that you go into Burning Crusade is Draenor. It is Draenor after Nazrul does all of his evil orc magic with the Burning Legion. Third, the Draenei were not evil. They were actually chased away from their home planet by the Legion, who some of the Draenei leaders, both Kil'jaeden and Archimonde, decided to side with, and Velen fled. In fact, if you pay attention to the story in WoW, you can actually see the genocide, of the Draenei in Outland. You can see what's left of it. The Path of Glory, that's paved with bones. Then from there, I will go into its most popular expansion, which was, of course, Wrath of the Lich King. A lot of people are waiting to kill Arthas, of course, Warcraft 3, being an RTS thing. They will say that was, while it's a bit cliche, person grabs power that they shouldn't meddle with and then makes ultimately bad decisions leading to their downfall. I mean, there is so much there. Arthas, the entire time, the entire expansion of Wrath of the Lich King is taunting you and building you. And finally, when you get to him, you're ready to kill him. He's like, all right, and the show's over. Boom! And breaks it. And then you find out that you were going to be the generals of the Legion the generals of the Scourge to take over Azeroth to fight off the Legion. You eventually, of course, through plot device, Tyrannus Milithil reses you, whatever, that's fine. You then find out there always has to be a Lich King. We get a sacrifice. That's a thing. We then move on to Cataclysm, is where the rails started to go off. And and the reason I say that is because that's what is in that's being opened. You know, so they started run out of lore at Cataclysm. Then Momp was based on the Pandorans, which Chen Stormstout was in like 2 campaigns in Warcraft 3. Then from there you go to Warlords of Draenor, which allowed you to actually backpack, play through essentially what was Warcraft 2. Then from there, and you mentioned that Gul'dan didn't have. No, hold on. This is very important. Gul'dan, you mentioned that it didn't matter if you won or lost. In fact, it was through our winning that the Gul'dan from the alternate timeline came through and orchestrated everything that happened in Legion, which led to the death of a character that people were like, holy shit, I can't believe those characters died. Varian Wrynn being one of them. In fact, you could pull up the death animation, the death of Varian Wrynn. It's pretty epic. And then of course, then we move into Battle for Azeroth after Legion and the Shadowlands. The Shadowlands was referenced in Wrath of the Lich King at the death of Sylvanas, because we have to remember that Sylvanas threw herself off Icecrown in order to die, and she's in she's in the maw. But anyways, I don't want to be too grand.
How much of that were you able to follow?
I talk a lot.
No, it's not because of you.
They were words.
It's not because of you. Nimicry, you explained that very well. I understood what you were talking about because I have the context of the world's lore. But it's so much of a mess that, like, unless you're part of that experience for 20 years, it's like, what? Like, I could sum up Final Fantasy 14 as in, there was this world called Eorzea. Bahamut existed inside a moon, came down, destroyed everything. People sacrificed their lives. 5 years later, you come back to this world that's still in turmoil, and the companies come together to fight the bad guys, and everything else besides that is character stories. Like, a person's going through an arc, they're being developed, whereas Sylvanas is like, now, first I have a crap character model. Now I have a good character model. Now I have a relevance in the story. Now I'm going to disappear for an expansion. Now I'm going to come back and be evil Hitler. Now I'm raising the dead from the dead land that was mentioned in one line in Wrath of the Lich King. And it's just so impenetrable. It's so... Can you honestly tell me they're not just making this shit up as they go along?
Oh, no. That's why I said at Cataclysm, they started to run out of lore.
I will commend you. Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King, fully tied into Warcraft 3, build up they finished off the lore. They were relevant to the story that had been developed beforehand. But everything afterwards is just... whatever. I love Mr. Pandaria, but it's still an expansion about a race that had barely been mentioned.
And I mentioned that it was that Chen Stormstout was in 2 campaigns in Warcraft 3. Granted, he was cool. He was cool, and I like Chen Stormstout. But it's one of those things. Mike, so since I'm trying to convince you, I'll talk to you directly if you don't mind words at this point, since I want to make sure that let me try to do a succinct thing. The World of Warcraft follows the story of 2 factions, the Horde
and the Alliance.
And the Alliance. You play as a rank and file hero or a champion in the service of the Horde or the Alliance. Your actions ultimately lead to the success or failure of said faction and their goals, whether that be to take on a bigger bad, whether that be to fight each other, whether that be to fight an alien invasion. And I use alien.
I actually think that's a mark against the series, because it's supposed to be like we're all fighting against each other, yet they always seem to come together at the end to beat the big bad. It's we're a world of war, but we stop fighting for 20 minutes so we can all gather on an island to take out the bad guys.
Well, they sometimes, while there a lot of people have had criticisms of the kumbaya moments, as it were. They're still official. They still fight. Like, there's still war going on. It just happens to be that these, and for narrative purposes, these heroes, these champions are there. So, for example, we'll use the Siege of Orgrimmar is the example I'll use here. Depending on which faction you play, you'll see 2 different cinematics when you take down Garrow Shellscream.
They did do really well in Pandaria. That Pandaria was my expansion.
Yeah, they did. It was great. But what I'm saying is that they'll take two different areas. So if you play as the Horde, you see the from Vol'jin's perspective, and it's mostly Vol'jin just being like, hey, we took care of ourselves. If you win as the Alliance, Varian will be like, if you step out, I'm letting you guys go. If you step out of line again, this time there's no mercy. And again, you as a champion on both sides, because you can be a champion on both sides, you just get to see what the leaders of your faction do. But you actually execute the will of the people, and so you're more, instead of being a hero like the Warrior of Light or the Warrior of Darkness, you are part of a bigger unit, for lack of a better word. So that might be a little more succinct than specific lore characters, which I will recognize to someone who is not deep in it. I might as well speak Greek to you. I might as well be like, hey, the puppy dog on the treadmill is the thing, so it's, I get it.
Masti and Jag are making some relevant points here, and they both connect into each other, but basically it summarizes to everyone is playing MMOs for completely different reasons. Some people are playing for the fight, some people are playing for the world, some people are playing for the lore. The most important thing is that none of them are the right answer. Every game is something. The reason we're competing these two games against each other is because they are the most relevant MMOs right now, and we want to see, like, if you were going to start in the genre or go back to it, which one, Mike, as someone who kind of dips in and out, which one would be more to his liking? Jag says that I don't know if most players care about lore because they're about the people that they share the world with and the fun, and I find groups, the days of lore really making sense have passed in MMO. Not in Final Fantasy XIV. Final Fantasy XIV's story is already prepared years in advance. They're working on that, like they're writing the story in 2.0 specifically to connect to the story in 3.0. So if you want an MMO with a story that makes sense, Final Fantasy XIV is that game.
I will also say that if you happen to read the books for WoW as opposed to just play the game, you can come up with a lot more lore. That is sadly a point against my side.
Yeah, you shouldn't have to.
Yeah, well, you're right. You shouldn't have to, for one. And second, I don't know. Listen, if anybody here hasn't played through the Legion storyline, I don't know what to tell you. I am my scars, I guess. Whatever. It's
like reading the comic books to find out why C-3PO had a red arm.
Yeah.
That's how I feel about read the books to find out about why this character did this thing in this one scene. Sometimes it isn't even consistent.
Yeah.
Would be interesting to know what percentage of MMO players care about lore. I would say it's probably much higher in Final Fantasy XIV than it is in WoW. And that's not a criticism against WoW. If I had to compliment WoW on one thing, is that you don't have to do all the story to get to all the content. I appreciate that you can just do one expand. Yeah, you're going to mention the changes in Shadowlands, aren't you?
I am, because I just for people who may want to play it, I don't want them to get on the wrong path.
If you don't care about lore, the new expansion for WoW is basically going to let you play through one expansion from like level 10 to...
That's not what I was making.
Go ahead.
Okay, so with the leveling changes that have happened on the beta in WoW for Shadowlands, normally you can just speed through zones and it's not a problem. In this, because they kind of nerf the XP gains in order to get people to experience more of the story content, because a lot of devs have been talking about it, people have been experienced the story content. After the first zone, Bastion will give you like 4 or 5 levels. Maldraxxus might get you 2. Then Ardenweald might get you 2 more. And unless you did all the side quests, by the time you get to Revendreth, the final zone, in Shadowlands, you won't have enough experience to hit 60. So you will have to do some of the side quests.
That's a good thing, I think.
I think it is too. But because I've done some of the side quests in Bastion, and it really fleshes out the purpose of the zone. Like, why are these angelic beings ferrying souls across the Shadowlands? It really gives them purpose and sets up, like, you actually get to play through a history of when the evil people fought against the good people, and you get to actually step into the history as that person through the eyes of like a librarian. And it's like, oh, this is great. So anyways, I just wanted to mention that specifically just in case anybody did that, because I don't want somebody to accidentally screw themselves over, as it were.
Yeah,
Mike.
One thing that I'm going to ask about World of Warcraft, you said that, the Horde Alliance changes. How much do they actually impact the world? Like, I know Alliance is the most
admittedly
popular.
a bit, but it's taken like 20 years for that impact to occur.
So how much do they impact the world? Well, they carve out their zones of influence, obviously. Everybody they have their bases and their fortifications and their things. Usually what is seen in terms of impacting the world, we can see, honestly, is the best example I can think of is the Throne of Thunder in Mists of Pandaria, because it started off with you start off on a ship, and then as you do quests, you progressively unlock the zone and move forward operating bases up, and as you do that, you create more daily quests and objectives for you to hold. You could work through the environment, or you could work against the other faction. So you could do PvE or PvP at that point. I will also say that with Legion being one of my favorite expansions, the class halls kind of blurred that line.
They were amazing. They were one of the best things.
They're amazing. But what had happened is it wasn't that you were a Horde Paladin or an Alliance Paladin. You were a Paladin. Yeah. And so you played through your storyline, and that helped you understand the world as it went through. I will if anybody here hasn't played through the Paladin and Death Knight campaigns, are essentially mirrors of each other in certain ways. And they tell a different story. It's absolutely wonderful. I recommend that highly for anybody in WoW. But
it's one of WoW's strongest moments, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's good. I have as a Paladin forever. When Tyrion died and Tyrion Forgeling did get killed, I felt that in my soul, because he definitely catches Ashbringer, purifies, and smites the fuck out of Arthas. Just boom. It's great. Anyway, I apologize.
It's time to take a vote, Mike. What to you as an individual who wants to pop into an MMO? Which one would win here?
Again, I think I'm going to have to give it to Final Fantasy, purely just that there's a bit more of linearity to it. World of Warcraft again, I imagine once you've got your knowledge of it, Nim, like once you've got that 20-year investment and you can, you know it all up there, absolutely. I think that would probably be such a fleshed out, rich world. But yeah, for a scrub like me,
it is a very rich world. There's a lot of different things because everything has there are stories. There are even toys that reference community memes. For example, the Gammon toy. Gammon used to be a merchant that was always grief killed, and then I believe it was in Pandaria, they gave him a toy where you could turn into Gammon, and there was a thing where if you let Gammon live through the raid, he would give you an achievement. And he references the fact that I've been broken bones thousands of times, no more. And he charges in with an axe. And he's like, I've had it, no more Mr. Nice Taran.
So now we're going to move on to the final part of this equation. And God, I don't even know where to start with this one. Community. So which game has the better community? I am going to let Nim go first with this one. Just out of politeness, I don't think I've got a hard argument here, but go on.
All right. So does WoW have a better community than Final Fantasy XIV? I would say in certain situations, yes. In certain situations, yes. And in certain situations, no. Now, you're going to be like, man, that's kind of a cop-out answer. Let me get a little bit more specific, a little more granular. Are there toxic, asshole elitists who perform as gray parsing scrubs? Yes. Oh, my God. Yes. Yes, there are. But there are also people who are, let's hypothetically say, 20% of me, right? I'm always willing to be out there, help, teach, learn, hear guides, hear everything. Here's something I worked on. And that's that. And now my expertise is in player versus environment. So you run into me in player versus environment. So, raids, dungeons, things like that. You're in a good spot. I don't know anything about PvP other than
I did play some PvP in WoW. Not going to lie, when I actually had the gear, ton of fun kiting people around with my archer.
Oh, absolutely.
That was with my hunter. Actually being able to stun them long enough and keep them away from me. Very satisfying experience. It was something I didn't play it obsessively, but I did dabble into it.
Yeah, a casual match here and there, a lot of fun. But the other thing is that it depends on which zone of influence you're talking about as it comes to the community. The PvP community tends to be just a tiny bit more toxic than the standard PvE community until you get into the elitist people, and usually elitist people aren't bad. I've played with some of the best players in the world, and I'm talking rank 1 players. Those people are chill because they know they're good, and they can help you get better. So as for the community, then when you get into the casuals, a lot of people are just pretty friendly. Hey, how you doing? Get in a dungeon? Yo, what's up? Welcome. I would say that WoW's community is wonderful, and is better than Final Fantasy XIV's community, if only for the fact that there are so many different branches that so many people do.
I have to fundamentally disagree. Every time I went into a dungeon in WoW, nobody spoke. Everybody ran through, and I would often try and say hi, like hello. I have macros for dialogue even, and these people just didn't speak to you. They just ran the dungeon. You were in, you were out, you were done. Even in raids, and yeah, pick-up raids are their own nightmare. Don't get me wrong, but
Yeah, we're not.
just the community is just, and if you died or messed up it somehow, they would just half the time they would just kick you out, or there would be no attempt to teach the player or educate them. And one of the most, and I've done hundreds of dungeons and raids in my time in WoW, but one of the most defining experiences I've had in Final Fantasy XIV was going into a dungeon and the healer didn't know what he was doing. He didn't understand the mechanics and stuff. So the tank, who was also familiar with a hunter, or who was also familiar with a healer, took the time to actually teach him the mechanics, and like, you should use this here, you should use this there. As we played through the dungeon, full conversation. Every time we wiped, we laughed. Like, that's a thing that happens regularly. If we die, the tank would be like, "Oh shit, that was my fault," or the healer would be like, "Sorry, I missed that heal," or whatever. And nobody, I've had maybe one or two instances where someone was like, "Eh." And I'm not saying there isn't any toxicity. Of course there is. There is everywhere you go. But it's the community in Final Fantasy XIV to me been so helpful, so kind, so decent, so supportive. If you're a lowly player, sometimes people will literally come up to you and give you free mounts and free pets and that sort of thing, just because you're a new player. And the level of kindness and just respect and lack of attitude in that game, to me, is unsurpassed by any other MMO, except maybe Guild Wars 2.
So the only toxicity I
Wait,
have
let me finish one more statement.
I'm sorry, my apologies.
No, not at all. I forgot to mention this. You mentioned that some of the top players are some of the nicest people. That right there is the problem. It's the top 1%. The other 89% of people are shit to you. This is my experience. They're rude, they're impatient, they don't want to talk, they don't want to interact. For a massively multiplayer game, WoW often feels incredibly lonely. That's probably the best way I can explain it. Unless you're lucky to get in with the right group of people. But it's only that group of people, from my experience. It's like, especially during Warlords of Draenor, you literally just spent all your time sitting in your thing. There was no world to be a part of.
Yeah, no, that's a problem with the queuing, especially when you're leveling. I know late Cataclysm, late Pandaria, and of course Warlords of Draenor. You were often in cities, World of Qcraft, where you would queue up and do stuff, and you would never, this is one warrior and two other players that I just, it doesn't matter. I can find two other players. That's something else. But when I say that they're some of the nicest, meaning that I'm not saying that they alone are kind, saying that the people who might be able to have an ego about their abilities do not. And now, not to a man, of course. There are some people who have egos. There's toxicity everywhere. But I have seen so much kindness from random dungeons. I've taught people, I've had people teach me, and I've also had people be rude. I think though that with the fact that a lot of the mechanics I think this will boil down to a synced unsynced issue, right? So you have to run in Final Fantasy XIV, you have to run your 4-man dungeon synced usually. Now, in order to get your
you have to. Like, there's no question, you have to.
Okay. In WoW does not have that. So what I could do is, let's say Mike is brand new. He's like, Nim, help me out. I rolled a Discipline Priest. I want to learn how to do atonement healing. Okay, Mike, we're going to go into a dungeon appropriate to your level so you can equip the gear. I'm going to go in as my character. I'm going to tank. You just focus on learning your rotation. And then I'm not going to die regardless. Like, I'll be fine. And Mike learns some stuff. Now, does everybody do that? Of course not. Not everybody does that. But I have the ability to do that as opposed to having to do something unsynced where you don't get any reward.
But WoW just... but it may not exist when you've got the people that don't do that, yes, but I've found from Final Fantasy XIV that everyone is helpful, and part of that reason based, like, some people are mentioning this as well in the guild
My
chat.
fiance is home. 1 second, I apologize. Everybody meet the lovely Roxanne. She's lovely. I apologize. She
Hello,
just came in.
Roxanne. Top of the morning.
Just wanted to, I didn't want to have her walk by and be like, why are there strange women walking in your house? And be like, listen, let me tell you a funny story. I apologize for interrupting you. Words, you were something
That's
about...
totally fine. I just feel like Final Fantasy XIV, by its fundamental design, don't get me wrong, Jag makes perfectly valid points in the chat about how, like, his community meets up twice a year, and there's guilds are amazing. You can find wonderful people in those. You can also find people cheating on their wives in those, though.
Yeah.
But I feel like WoW, by its very design, encourages people to be nice, whereas WoW often does not.
So that was a misspeak there. But I know you meant Final Fantasy XIV.
Sorry,
by its design. Yeah, we're not gonna. You said WoW by its very design.
Sorry, Final Fantasy XIV. Yeah, yeah.
That's fine. We're not gonna clip that out, right, chat?
My bad. I will edit it. Final Fantasy XIV, by its fundamental design, encourages niceness and kindness in its user base. Mike.
Now you see, this is where I'm gonna have to go with personal experience here.
Okay.
I'm actually
that's the most important thing.
WoW.
You're giving
my God!
You're giving it to WoW?
The community, yes.
You have betrayed me, Mike. Betrayal.
No. Two of my friends.
You're going to have to elaborate on that one.
Yeah. Two of my friends started Final Fantasy XIV on Twitch. You know, they a bit like me at the moment. They've lost their way. They didn't really know what to stream on Twitch. So, hey, let's hop into Final Fantasy XIV. Within an hour, both of them had quit it and cried because people were just horrible to them.
That is really surprising to me because
I
have never had a negative experience. Like, what did they explain? What happened, or like?
Well, I was in the streams with both of them, and it was basically just they couldn't find a place to go to, couldn't find where they next needed to go for their quest. Asked somebody, and I'm not sure if I'm not gonna say it's the reason. Both of them were women, so it basically just boiled down to the traditional go make sandwich, baby machine, yada yada.
Oy vey. Listen, I'm sorry.
If I could find out who these people are, I would hunt them down and demand Square install a player killer system.
Yeah.
Just so I can mess with these people. Because
judging by reaction in the chat there, and from what you've said, words like I trust your opinion on a lot of things. It sounds as if they were just so unfortunate to hit that small margin.
I am so disappointed to hear that actually exists, because
if I may, I haven't had a lot of toxic experiences in Final Fantasy XIV. My only time was when I was doing Savage Raiding and Expert Dungeons. I had some toxic players that were like, "How come you don't know these mechanics?" Like, I'm sorry, man.
How dare you?
And again, but most players have been very nice. The fact that someone literally was like, go throw generic, shitty male gamer insults at people, that's terrible. Like, I honestly, and that gives the MMO community kind of a bad taste in people's mouths. Because look, whether they play WoW, whether they play Aeon, whether they play Final Fantasy XIV, whether they play whatever, I want people to have fun. man, it's your life. Spend it how you want. So I apologize for the diatribe there, but it's just like, Jesus Christ, guys. Like, I'm trying to help the industry. Don't do that stuff. Like, it's time for slap.
So regardless of whatever Mike picks here, know that we both fully support both these games. And at the end of the day, if you enjoy one over the other, awesome. Mike, what's your final verdict?
Overall, I am going to have to give it to Final Fantasy XIV, but I am willing, if both of you are happy to chaperone me, I am willing to install and possibly, even pay for a couple of months on each of them. And I will quite happily, I'll follow you. I will listen to everything you've got to say. I will play them. And, I may be persuaded to change my decision.
With the new leveling system, you should absolutely get into Nim's Guild. And that will be a great way for you to start progressing through that game. So, you got to the end of the video, huh? Thank you for checking out today's discussion. If you enjoyed our guests or the subjects we were talking about, please consider checking the links down below. All the information will be there. You can find us on all the social medias and all the usual places under the name No Word Count. And if you really enjoyed the conversation, please do consider checking us out on Patreon and Twitch and helping to support the channel, because that will just help us to continue bringing you more great discussions with more great people. Take care of yourselves. Stay beautiful.